from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. This is The Gailey Show. I'm your host, John Parker. Today, it's our weekly Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode, where we sit down with a guest for the episode to help us think more clearly about the major issues of the day facing the queer and allied community. After that, I continue my Queer in the Cosmos essay series. Today's guest is a very special guest, friend of the show, Lara Lillibridge. She is the author of 3 memoirs, Girlish, Growing Up in a Lesbian Home, Mama Mama, Only Mama, and her most recent, The Truth About Unringing Phones, which came out last year. Lara is the Hippocampus Magazine, awarded her their Literary Citizen of the Year in 2019. She is a writing instructor and longtime mentor in the Association of Poets and Writers Mentorship Program, where she was my mentor. So, Lara, it is so good to see you again. Welcome back to The Gailey Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so you are a teacher and a mentor and an editor and on various ways, a magazine co-editor of an anthology. Let's talk about writing queerly right now. And I know that you had just finished teaching a class, making art while the world is burning. So maybe we want to start there.
Yeah. This take 2 of the Trump administration, so many of us have lost our fire, right? Like the first time around, so many of us were fired up, and now we are so beaten down. At least I personally have felt so beaten down. And I had been lucky enough before the pandemic to take a workshop with Luis Alberto Oria, who is a Mexican-American writer and Pulitzer finalist. And he gave everyone this copy, a paper copy. It does not exist on the internet. About it's called My Manifesto, Hymns to the Broken. And it is about why do you write and how do you write when I believe he called him the orange-faced power cowboy is trying to hold you down. But really, it could be anything. It could be your family that is crushing your spirits. It could be society. It could be, the court system. It could be school. It could be a friend who has abandoned or somehow hurt you. There are so many reasons to feel downtrodden, right? And what can we offer the world? What can we offer each other? And as a writer, for me, it's story, right? For a queer person to see themselves in a book, for a queer kid to read a book with a queer detective or time traveler, not just coming out stories, but stories of queer joy. That's a freaking act of resistance, right? That is saying, I will not be erased. I am, here to be counted. And to me, it is the most powerful thing that we can do right now is share each other's stories and share them online and forward and flood the internet with queer art and just stand up and be counted, which is terrifying, right? Like is there a less safe time to be queer? I mean, not in my lifetime. Certainly in my parents' lifetime, there were, arrests and terrible things that happened. But right now it's pretty terrifying too.
It feels like we were just talking about this on the show last week about how the lavender scare, we're doing it all over again. The purge of LGBTQ people from federal government in the 1950s. And yet here we are again with transgender people. And I think that they're not going to stop there. They're going to go after the entire queer community, trying to purge them from federal employment. And it's almost word for word what they did in the 1950s. I'm curious about, in this class, what were sort of the themes that were coming up then as you're trying to talk through this manifesto and zero in on why we need to write, and what were the students like bringing forward to the table without giving away anything like personal?
So people wrote about who they were writing for a lot, which there was definitely queer writers in the room. There were Black women in the room. There were, disabled voices, just a lot of different people that are feeling very much attacked right now. But I think we all left with the feeling of being part of a community of writers, a community of people who are being othered, and people whose voices matter.
Yeah. I've been trying to sort out for myself of how do I feel in this moment? I haven't done so I do the essay series for this show on a weekly basis, and I've been doing that since the beginning. But that's more about like trying to sort out who I feel I am as a queer person just living in this cosmos. But other stuff that I've been working on, I just feel like no. And the reason why I've been feeling that way is this idea of am I feeling beaten down, or if I'm just so feeling so much rage that I'm like, fine, you voted for this, have it. Does that make sense?
Well, for me, rage turns into overwhelm and powerlessness, and then I just want to
Mm.
take a nap.
Mhm.
Like I am not motivated by it in the way I wish I was, you know. And when I get really enraged, I lose my words, which is completely not helpful.
Mhm.
Um, but when I think about the people that need our love and our support, particularly, I mean, I'm a mother. I have my youngest will be 17 this week, and my oldest is 19. And, so I guess my heart always kind of goes to the teen population and the young adults and my younger self as a teen. And I just want to flood the world with love for them right now, and hope. And it can be hard to think of where hope is, but we've been here before and we survived, right?
Mm.
Like we have been through um, just as bad or worse as now, and we have survived. We as a people collectively, and they matter, and they will survive too, and we will help them. Um, that is how I get through it. Um, there's a Black poet um, named Etheridge Knight, and he wrote back, I want to say in the 60s, but I might be wrong about that. But he said, you have to be telling people essentially, I love you, or else you have no basis for your art.
Mm.
And I love you can take the form of rage, right? Standing
Mhm.
up for yourself is standing up for everyone else in your group too.
Mhm.
Um, and, but it's also, come sit down next to me. You're okay with me. Let me tell you a story of how I felt, how you feel now, and how I got through it. Right.
Mhm.
And the hope for me is the outrage. When you talk about the lavender purges in the past, where was the outrage? Certainly not to the extent
Mm-mm.
that we see now.
Mm-mm.
And having a college student, my oldest is at Ohio State, um, very active in the queer community, very active in protests, and to see the youth of today just, screaming for change is really invigorating for me, you know.
Mhm.
Um, when I feel old and middle aged and worn out, it's nice to see that the next generation is there to carry the torch.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm curious how this manifests for you then as a teacher in terms of writing craft, right? So there is a lot of this does feel cyclical, right? That we have been here before, we're doing that. How does that then manifest in terms of writing craft? Like, do you find yourself gravitating as a teacher towards um, uh, writing prompts or other authors from that time period of like, here's craft lessons that we can learn from them that we should be applying today?
well, one of my absolute favorite writers is Audre Lorde, who
Mm.
she wrote poems and essays and speeches, and she was a strong lesbian voice and Black voice at a time when neither are welcome.
Mhm.
And she was also a parent, and she was, for me, I think of her sort of as like my godmother because she was the first lesbian parent I saw that wrote about parenting. And as you know, I have lesbian parents. But, she wrote over and over again, your silence will not protect you. And when I was afraid, I didn't speak because, I was afraid of what would happen, but I didn't speak and still I was afraid. And that to me is the biggest lesson. I find with my students, um, I teach, I'm definitely looking for those marginalized voices to
Mm-hmm.
bring them to audiences and also less known voices, perhaps people that are with smaller publishers or lesser known literary journals, to share words that people might not find on their own, and to elevate those voices. Um, I think that writing wise, everyone's voice is different, right? And everyone's voice is important. And I took a class in dismantling um, it was, I think, creating an anti-racist writing workshop is I think what it was officially called. Um,
Mm.
but they talked about how forcing students to write in the style of someone else is a very white colonial kind of mentality. And what we should be doing is allowing people to find and strengthen their own voice and write in a way that is true to themselves. And that really struck me as, like, as a teacher, as important. Whereas before it might be, okay, here is this essay, let's all read it. Now write an essay in the style of so and so. Now what I do is I try to offer several different essays from different voices so that someone might connect with one,
Mm-hmm.
um, and try to really stress the importance of, being inspired by it, but not copying it, finding your own way in. Um, I run a free nonfiction writing group in Cleveland on the second Saturday of the month through Literary Cleveland, and people's responses to these prompts. One writer,
You hold that thought.
yeah,
I have got to fit in a quick short break here. We are going to have more with author, editor, and mentor, writing craft teacher Lara Lillibridge. Stay tuned. More after the break. Welcome back to the Gaily Show. I'm your host, John Parker. It is 21 minutes past the hour. It is Thursday, which is our time of the week for Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly. My guest is Lara Lillibridge. Lara is the author of 3 memoirs and a middle grade fantasy novel, Dragon Brothers. Lara co-edited an anthology with Andrea Fischetti entitled Feminine Rising, Voices of Power and Invisibility, which was a Silver Indies Book of the Year winner. Lara, before the break, you were talking about a workshop that you run with Literary Cleveland. We want to pick it up there and the work that you do in teaching authors.
yes. So, we will have a prompt that I will give to the group. When the group can range from 15 people to 30 people, depending on the month. And some people will respond with really like a call to action, um, and a strong, angry piece. Other
Mhm.
people will write something very interior and more trauma based. And then, there's always someone that will write sort of a humorous story, a true story, about their life, but told with a sort of wry sarcasm that makes us laugh. And all of those are correct, right? Like all of your responses in art are the correct response. And so to kind of open up the way that material is presented to a group so that everyone feels welcome to respond in whatever way works. And I also always say, if you don't like it, if you don't like my prompt, write anything you want, as long as you're writing, you're doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
um, because art is how we respond to the world. It's how we respond to our history, to our present, and to our hopes and dreams, our futures. And no one can tell you the right way to do that.
Mm. That is an interesting way of putting it. No one can tell you the way to do it, but you do such a great job. I speak from personal experience of guiding a writer, and when they have an idea for something, of helping them to kind of see and realize the goal that they want to have for the piece, and giving them that great feedback of how to, I don't know if manifest is the right way, but helping folks realize this is the horizon that you're heading towards right now with this piece. Is that where you want to go? And like giving those sort of uh, exercises and prompts to kind of help think through and go, oh, okay, this is how I can both improve my craft and then get this piece to go where I want it ultimately to go. Do you find, because you teach creative nonfiction, do you find that there are, because this is something I learned as I was starting to get into essay writing, there's all these different ways, shapes that you can write. You can, the hermit essay or the fragmented essay where you do like lots of little different vignettes of moments in time, or the braided essay where you're sort of telling 2 or 3 stories and weaving them together at once to get to your conclusion. Do you find that folks are gravitating to specific forms right now as we're sort of entering into this new fascist terrain?
I think anything unexpected or experimental, people are interested in. People are interested in discarding the rules. Um, to paraphrase Rage Against the Machine, F you, I won't do what you tell me. So I think that forms that break with established conventions are very popular as an act of resistance.
There, something that I like to talk about with folks, and I want to pose this question to you, is what does it mean, or can we write queerly?
Yeah, I've seen that as a topic at different conferences and conventions, and I think that when you are a queer person, your view on the world is already coming from a different perspective.
Mhm.
And in a way, at least in my experience, writing queerly is very much from the outside in. It's very much a view of society that is one that is not necessarily of acceptance and joy. But I think also it is a place of acceptance and experimentation and people willing to um, go against what they've always been told they should or shouldn't do. For example, I'm writing a book. I'm going to have to look up the name on my phone. It is a sex memoir
Mhm.
by a 82-year-old queer man called The Loves of My Life by Edmund White. And it just came out, I think, this year. And like, who said that a queer person, an 82-year-old person, could write a sex memoir that people would want to read? But, this is history, and there are not that many elders in the queer community, particularly gay men. So many people were killed in the AIDS epidemic, which is, not over, but certainly has tapered off. That his voice is important, and his stories of his escapades are history, as well as being fun. But he didn't wait for someone to give him permission, right?
Mhm.
I think when you're a queer person, you just kind of have to get to the point where you have to accept yourself and decide this is who I am, and I can't change it, and I have no other way to be in the world. And as an artist, as a writer, to see this gentleman say, I am 82 years old and I have had a lot of sex, let me tell you about it. Like, what is more like liberating than that, right? Like, what is more in your face? I am not going to sit down and be quiet and be good. And what is more like self-actualized? Because the whole thing about elder discrimination and queer discrimination, and so many things.
Mhm.
Um, but that is, I think, a very queer lens to be willing to go to a level of explicitity, is that a word?
Sure, it is now.
Explicitness, a way, an interest in exploring things in new ways. I think, of course, of Genderqueer, the graphic
Mhm.
memoir, which, no one gave them permission to write a graphic memoir, which is a very rare thing, and to cover the subject matter. And, yet the world reacted strongly to it. And yes, it's the most banned book right now in
Mhm.
libraries, but people are talking about it.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's hard to remember when we're getting this pushback, it is our existence and our art is sparking strong feelings. And sparking strong feelings is really what we want to do as artists, as writers, painters, whatever your art form is, right?
Mhm.
Um, Indifference is the enemy of art, boredom, right? Like, to me, I'm more okay with someone reading my book and leaving a negative review than someone writing a review saying I got bored and couldn't get past page 50.
Right. I wanna pick that up after this commercial break. Folks, be sure to connect with our sponsors and our advertisers. They make conversations like these possible. Visit them, shop with them, and tell them that you heard about them on The Gailey Show on AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Broadcasting from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. This is The Gailey Show. I am your host, John Parker. Hello to those streaming us on our YouTube channel right now, youtube.com/@The Gailey Show. With me today is Lara Lillibridge. She is the author of 3 memoirs, Girlish, Growing Up in a Lesbian Home, Mama, Mama, Only Mama, and The Truth About Unringing Phones, which just came out last year. Lara is the Hippocampus Magazine, awarded her their Literary Citizen of the Year award for 2019. She is a writing instructor and longtime mentor in the Association of Poets and Writers Mentorship Program. I can attest to the brilliance of her, as she was my mentor a few years back. Laura, we were talking about reactions to books because I think a lot of queer authors, either as they're getting started as emerging writers or as they're starting a new project, really think about how is this book going to be received? What do I want to provoke in people? And so you were talking about how the reactions that you hope for as a writer.
Yeah, it's easy for fear to get the best of us,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, you know, I find that myself, this is a bit of a tangent, but I'm going with it. Um, when I am feeling oppressed and when I'm feeling angry, that makes me more loud and more in your face from, of course, the safety of my own living room. I'm not very brave in person, hate to say. Um, but, you know, I was saying that when someone has a negative reaction to your book, they have still read it, they are still talking about it, you have still caused them to look at something in themselves. And oftentimes people feel outrage over something because it hits a nerve, right? It
Mm-hmm.
triggers something in them. In high school, I wanted to be nice. And I wanted everyone to just think that I was nice and they couldn't remember much about me. They just knew I was nice. Well, that's the last possible thing that I want as a writer, right? I don't want to be nice. I want people to know clearly who I am and what I stand for. Um, I have a book coming out this November with Guts Publishing called Hysterical Harlot, an alphabetized book on gender and shame, and it is all about being genderqueer, about not fitting into the mold of being female, and sex stereotypes and gender stereotypes, and shame that I've carried all my life about sex. And I was really afraid to publish it last year, but now this year I feel like it is essential to take that mantle for those that can't speak, because it is not safe for everyone to speak.
Mhm.
You know, our beautiful trans community is under so many physical attacks, in addition to the general, um,
Mhm.
always present sort of queer attacks, right? And not everyone has the ability to stand up and stand out. Um, and certainly, I see that the writing community, I see more calls for submissions where they allow you to use a pen name, where before, even, you know, a couple of years ago, that was not something that was ever encouraged. And I think that people realize that it isn't safe to be loud, and in your face right now about being queer, or about belonging to any marginalized group. Um, but I'm 51, you know, I uh, don't have a lot to lose at this point. I mean, knock wood, I don't want my house burned down. But, you know, I mean, we always have things to lose. But I mean, for me, I mean, the best thing about having lesbian parents is that they are 100% accepting of, you know, anyone I date. My family is never going to excommunicate me,
Mhm.
because of my views. And I don't have that risk. I don't have the social risk of getting, of losing friends, because everyone pretty much knows who I am. And I don't worry about getting fired. So for me to be out, uh, and in my art, at least, to be writing loudly, I can do it so others can't. And then to create space for other people to be able to do that, and to just show people you can do it and live, right? That's
Mm.
when I do a talk, I will say, these are topics I have written about and lived. Um, because so often we feel like we're not going to live if we talk about these things, that the shame, the fear is too great.
Can you talk about that for queer writers who are listening to this right now and they're considering a project that they want to do, but they kind of get into this, will a publisher like this or not? Will an agent, like, how do I get it through the gatekeeping? And you're kind of coming at it from a right, like, tell the story, do that. How should a writer be navigating that right now between the, this is how I want to talk about it, but I also feel like I got to write it this particular way to get it sold, you know, either to a publisher or to get an agent to take it on to help me sell it.
So it's easier if you can separate financial success with literary success, right?
Mm,
If you can step aside and say, I want my art to exist in the world, and I realize that's probably not going to be a big five publisher. Um, we often have hopes and dreams of being that one, that one voice that they pick out of the beige world, but most of us aren't, right? Like most of us are not, the darling. But there are lots and lots of independent publishers out there. And write your story without fear. Write your story as if, I, I don't say as if no one will read it, because to me, I write to be read. I think of a younger version of myself on the other side of the country who desperately needs to know that they're okay. And I
mhm,
tell myself, this person needs to see my story, and my story will make them more okay with who they are and telling their story. Um, you can be protective in editing, right? Like when you find a publisher and you're about to go to press and you have that last final revision, that's a time when you can pull back and say, okay, I really am not comfortable with this level. I need to perhaps use some
yeah,
more metaphor. I need to cloak some people. I need to, um, you know, write around the story a bit more vaguely. That's a great time to do that. Or your last revision before you send it to a publisher, also. But at least in your beginning drafts, you're honest as you possibly can be. When I write, I ask myself, is there more? You know, have I told the story clearly? Have I told all aspects of the story? And the other thing is, if it's good, you can do anything, right? Like you look at these people that publish these books with big five publishers that are making lots of money about books that you know, no one would say would be publishable. For example, my book club read The House in the Cerulean Sea. Um, I forgot his name. I want to say TJ Klein, but that could be wrong. It feels a lot like a middle grade book because the main characters are children, but it's actually from the perspective of a gay man, and it's an adult novel. And it's very much a story of children, but it's an adult book. And it's like, just if someone came to me and said, "Is this publishable?" I would say, "No way." Like, no one will ever touch an adult book that has that many kids in it. And yet, wildly successful, right?
Mhm.
Like, one of the most, talked about books of whatever, I think it came out last year. So if you do something well, you certainly can uh, go to any level of success. But there's Substack, there's Medium, there's social media. There are places where even if the world is saying no, you can still put your voice out there. You can still go viral. You can still reach the people that need to read you. You can self-publish. I self-published my middle grade novel because no one wanted a middle grade novel with a genderqueer character that wasn't a coming out story. He just happened to be a kid, a boy that liked to wear makeup and dresses, and it was no big deal. And I wanted that book out in the world, so I published it myself, and it's beautiful. And I'm just as proud of it as I am of my other books. So I think when we expand our idea of what is success for me, when we expand our idea of like who is out there to amplify my voice, there are so many people out there who very much want to publish those of us who live on the margins, and those of us who are feeling beaten down right now. Um, they might not offer you, a contract with commas on it, multiple commas, and all of that. But what is your goal? My goal is so the person who has never seen themselves in a book can see themselves in a book.
So well put. I find I've only published like a handful of essays, and I have never worried about being a queer writer, and particularly a queer Armenian writer, right? And because that's an area that nobody writes to, really,
Right.
and at all. That's a different conversation for a different episode. But there are some folks who still are like, well, we're all the same as straight and cis people. We all deal with the same things, and I don't want to get sort of looped into that particular box. And I find writing about queer stories and queer life experiences to be liberatory, actually. That like, well, actually, we don't have to be tied into the prison of gender and sexuality that straight writers seem to always find themselves in when we look at their characters or whatnot. How do you feel about that as you've published several books now, and you're a writing instructor, and you've won awards, about this idea of being sort of pigeonholed as a queer writer?
Um, I don't care as long as people read my book, to be honest. um,
Oh,
and I am someone who has been told by members of the queer community that my books weren't queer enough,
oh, geez.
that they wanted to see more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for example, with Girlish, my first book, they said, well, there wasn't much about, lesbian parents in there. And I'm like, well, is there a lesbian way to eat Cheerios, right? Like, day-to-day life is day-to-day life. And my point in the book was that it wasn't that my mom was a lesbian. That wasn't, the big crisis in my family. It was mental health issues that were the big crisis.
Yeah.
Um, I know people who write one, very sort of blind books where you can't tell um, the orientation or the race of the writer. And I know people who it's very much part of their identity, and whatever is true for you is fine. As a queer person, everything I write is a little queer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it doesn't really matter if I intend it to be or not. Um, it's who I am, so it's how I show up in my writing. Um, we all like to think that our books are for everyone, right? And that everyone could enjoy them. And I certainly believe it's true, but it's also about finding the right audience. And if you are identified as a queer writer, that tells queer readers that they should look for you. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that because I write creative nonfiction, identity is in it's just melded to all of my work. I wouldn't know how to write. Not that I don't write for straight audiences, because I absolutely do, with some books more than others, but I can only see the world through my own eyes, you know?
Exactly. Oh, I could talk to you for days and days and days. And unfortunately, we are at time. Laura, how can folks connect with you?
LaraLillibridge.com is my website. I am active mostly on Instagram and Threads these days. I'm on all the socials, but those are the two that I am most on.
Wonderful. And obviously, I recommend all of your books. We'll be linking to those, all three of them. We'll do as many as we can get on those show notes and on our website, because I just really enjoy your writing. And so I recommend it to all of our listeners as well. Laura, thank you for joining us here on The Gaily Show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We are going to continue one more break, but lots to get to. My Queer in the Cosmos essay series continues just for you after this break. Welcome back to The Gaily Show. I'm your host, John Parker. I close every week of this Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode with an original essay that I write as part of a series that I call Queer in the Cosmos, which is a queer, me, trying to figure out my place through learning about the cosmos and zooming around our universe, learning about it. Here today, chapter Lightyear 6. Have you ever said, I want to put this wish out into the universe? The idea that the universe is so big, so grand, and so random, for example, the butterfly effect, that by putting a wish, a true desire out into the universe, that it will let the universe know to pay attention to it, know that it's there. Knowing that it's there validates it, makes it real, makes it possible, allows for manifestation. This idea is coming back to me now as I'm hovering near Sagittarius A star. Sagittarius A star is the supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way. I write supermassive because that is how it is classified. There are regular black holes, and then there are supermassive black holes. Everything in the Milky Way orbits around Sagittarius A star. Its name comes from the fact that if you want to look at it, we need to look at the Sagittarius constellation, actually near the border of Sagittarius and Scorpius. It's part of the larger Sagittarius A region. Now, we say star, not because it's a star, but because of the asterisk that is next to the A. The asterisk denotes its radioactivity, which was how it was detected. I'm able to hover out here because, as I've learned, black holes don't swallow everything up. If our own star, the sun, transformed suddenly into a black hole, we'd still orbit around it unless we got too close. Speaking of which, as it turns out, a black hole isn't a hole. It's just a lot of matter, stuff, crammed into a tiny space. It's so big and has so much mass that its own gravity prevents anything from escaping. Not even light can get out. And if I get too close, I'll spaghettify, or another way of saying I'll be squeezed into the shape of a noodle before joining all the other matter at the center of the black hole. Sagittarius A star spins, like everything else in the universe, which seems to be on the move, spinning and rotating around something else bigger than it, or if it's the biggest thing, spinning in place. Black holes are big, and so is Sagittarius A star. But the universe is so big that it's becoming tedious trying to characterize its proportion. Light years, astronomical units, numbers with 12 zeros in them. The sizes in terms of length, width, and mass are so much larger than anything we're used to that the brain shuts down, does not compute. But if Earth was a black hole, meaning we took all of its matter, everything on Earth, and we crammed it all together into like how a black hole does, well, it would be the size of a ping pong ball. If we did the same to the sun, its diameter would be just shy of 4 miles, and Sagittarius A star's diameter is 14.6 million miles. Sagittarius A star flares up each day. Nice gentle flares and then very bright, blinding flares. Those are from its accretion disk, which is gas. Our black hole is sucking off stars who are too close, and it's shaped as a disk. Our supermassive black hole, however, warps space-time, meaning from directly above or directly below, if we're looking at it face on, it's just the shape of a disk. But from any other angle, the gravity distorts the light, and we see it bend so that Sagittarius A star looks like it has a hump of light around it. General relativity, remember that from last week, the thing I'm still trying to figure out, predicts that the center of Sagittarius A star, or any black hole, is a singularity, a place where matter is crushed together so tightly its density is infinite. Anything falling into the black hole ends up there, the singularity, theoretically. This is one of the most dangerous and dynamic and extreme places in the universe. Much more so than a MAGA rally. Not much more so, emotionally speaking. And when you put something out into the universe, you don't want it to... And when you put something out into the universe, you don't want it to come here to Sagittarius A star. The universe is a lonely place, at least our understanding of it, in the sense that there may be other beings, other life, but will we ever meet them? Maybe not in our lifetimes. In lieu of them, what is here for me to put something, a wish, a desire into? Who is listening? Another way of saying, let's put it into the universe, is to say, what am I putting into the universe? And therefore, what am I attracting? Am I being kind and therefore attracting kindness? Am I being enjoyable and therefore attracting invitations to parties? What am I putting into the universe? These days, anger, rage. This show, as well as my podcast, This Queer Book Saved My Life, creates a structured space to be kind, to be creative, to show empathy. Outside of it, I feel simmering rage. Beam me up, Scotty. Come on, aliens. Give my family and I a one-way ticket out of here. What I find myself putting into the universe is, what the F is wrong with you people? What happened to make you cruel for cruelty's sake? You gain no benefit from preventing gay marriage. You gain no benefit from preventing health care for trans kids. You gain no benefit from banning queer books. This planet, this life is so rare. We are so darn lucky. What the F is wrong with you people? I have rocketed myself out here to watch the absolute shock of physics that is Sagittarius A star, to see matter, even light, crushed into a singularity. I need to get away, if only for a moment, to one of the most dangerous places in the cosmos, just to escape, if only for an hour, here at the end of all the things that we send out into the universe. What am I putting out into the universe? To be honest, I can't figure it out. Well, how do I make you, MAGA and conservatives and fascists, leave me alone? How do I make you leave my community alone? How do I make you just go live your lives without being cruel for the sake of being cruelty? What am I putting into the universe? Frustration, yes. Rage, yes. But also a hunger for justice. I demand of the universe justice. I hope it's listening. That's all for today. Coming up next is the Matt McNeil Show. After that, Native Roots Radio. Until then, keep it queer, America.